Okay. Okay, I have clubbed unit 4, 5, and 6 because they were all about India, and they are a part of block 2. And I thought all of them make sense. As we were seeing last time in MDI 8, how now, because of changes of production, in fact, if you would have seen from unit 1, 2, and 3, it started off into a feudal system where there were artisans. As trade started growing, as production, more demand started happening, there was a putting out system. There was a manufactory which led to a factory. The factory led to industrial revolution. Industrial revolution brought in concepts like Taylorism and Fordism. Fordism was about a factory line. Factory line means mass production, which obviously meant there has to be a mass consumption. The mass production and mass consumption led to betterment of people's life in terms of them having more disposable income. Simultaneously, because of changes or betterment of transportation and media, people were traveling, people were seeing distant cultures. This disposable income, travel, culture led to diverse taste, which led to the concept of post-Fordism, where everybody wanted their own unique stuff, which led to flexible production, and which led to global production chains, the commodity chains of production chains. And we shall see that with globalization, India is a part of the global economy. Everything which happens worldwide would happen in India. And that is why we're talking about service, we're talking about home based production, self employment, informalization, causal, casualization, and contractual employment. So let's go into this. Before that, a couple of concepts I wanted to clear. I think Sanjeev had asked this question about outsourcing and contracting.
Yes,
They
sir.
are they are used interchangeably, but there is a slight difference. Outsourcing is more about shifting a whole function, whereas contracting is for a specific job or project. Sanjeev?
Sir, I am here, sir. Yes, listening.
So there is this essential difference between outsourcing and contracting. It does not prevent companies from outsourcing a specific job or a project, but by far on a larger platform, outsourcing is shifting a whole function. Contracting is a specific job or a project, bringing in help or typically giving it to somebody.
Sir.
For example, a software company outsources their entire IT help desk to a company in India, whereas the same company hires a freelance developer for 3 months to build a new feature in the mobile app. That's outsourcing and contracting.
Sir.
Okay.
Sir.
Okay. What I also did is, based on the last unit, I kind of made a flow chart to help you understand simply. Global production, scholars have defined it either as a global commodity chain or a global production network. More often than not, it's the same. It is how it is defined and the methodology that has been presented. Global commodity chains can also be subdivided into producer driven chain or buyer driven chain. Essentially, it's about global production. And why global production, or why commodity chains or production networks? Because at the end of the day, capitalism is about profit. Anywhere a company is able to push down costs, pushing down profit can only happen two ways: either you push down cost or your production increase surplus production. Now, surplus production has a limit because technologies can, is always a limitation. You can make it efficient, become technology can become better, but there is always a tapering off. So the second aspect is to push down cost. One of the ways to pushing down cost is to push down labor cost. That is why subcontracting, offshoring, outsourcing is happening with global north. outsourcing or offshoring to global south, where the costs are low, the regulations are lax, and they are able to push down costs. So that's a one flow diagram. The second flow diagram is like this: global production network, source of power, creation and control value within the network. There is the way the production networks control power is through corporate power, institutional power, and collective power. Corporate power is typically how strong the corporate is in terms of pushing down what it wants or pushing down prices. Institutional power is in terms of labor laws, is in terms of governments or governance. Collective power is in terms of unionization and so on, so. And the networks also links firm functionally and territorially. Earlier, what the production was in terms of a single territory or a single factory now is split up into multiple territories and multiple factories. In fact, many a times there are no factories. They are put into home-based production, which is what the putting out system was there in the Middle Ages, and they are embedded in a particular social and cultural dynamic of the place. So if there is a factory in Bangladesh, they will adhere to the social and cultural dynamics of Bangladesh. If it's in China, the social and cultural dynamics of China. So that's how the production networks work. And that is why, with this recent tariffs imposed by the US, the whole global economy and the whole global production networks are in a tizzy, specifically companies based out of US. So, everybody is trying to figure out what needs to be done. And that is why there was a 90-day halt on the tariffs. How this pans out, nobody knows. Nevertheless, people are figuring it out how to do. So that's a flow chart to help you understand. So let's look at these particular units, picture and patterns of employment across different sectors in India: self-employment, home-based employment, trends and characters. See, inevitably, one thing is very clear: with this change of production network, with this change of production, global production, obviously the labor also changes. The way labor is employed, the way production is done, uh, uh, and obviously in terms of more and capital system wanting more and more profits, they're going to push into various formats to push the wages down, to push the overheads down, so that the profit increases. Implications of casualization: the employment has become more flexible and casual rather than earlier. During the factory model or the Fordism, there was a security of employment, there was a permanent employment, there was permanent in terms of timing. Subsequently, the industries went through a strong phase of unionization. There were specific timings, there were job benefits, there was employment security. All this is again going through a circular mode, where there is casualization, there's flexibilization, there is no job security, there's hiring and firing, work hours have increased, and so on and so forth. So let's look at the structural changes in the labor market. Like any developed country, India also went from primary occupations into tertiary occupations. However, unlike the developed economies, which went from primary to industry, which was secondary, to service, which was tertiary, India kind of skipped the industrial part. The diversification of GDP in India largely from agriculture to services and not from agriculture to industry. And that also, in a way, is bound to happen, because as there is no linear path of movement. In fact, as more and more countries get integrated into the global economy, you tend to follow how the global movement happens in terms of production and in terms of labor movements. 2011, 12, 47. Now, this is where possibly the Indian planners and the policymakers got it wrong, or miscalculated. They went by the basic economic models of a linear transition from agriculture to industry to service sector, forgetting the fact that a large part of India's population was and still is, there in the agriculture sector. So, in spite of the movement out of agriculture, there was still a large part of India's population dependent on agriculture. And simultaneously, all these structural changes are happening. So, somewhere down the line, the agriculture sector, which needed a little more focus or quite a lot of focus, kind of got neglected. Obstacles to modernization of labor force, slow rate of generation of non-agriculture jobs, 2004-5 construction, 90s liberalization happened. So there are, as I always keep telling you, there are multiple engines in an economy of a nation. There is a political engine, there's a social engine, there is the economic engine, there are the global engines. Large-scale withdrawal of women from labor force continues to be the most severe challenge. In fact, compared to other Asian nations, let's say even the basic comparison between India and China, the amount of women in the labor force is much less. Labor participation rate is much less. We shall see in terms of some statistics. These are again old statistics. I do not know why there are not new statistics. I possibly I didn't delve deeper into finding new statistics if they were there. Striking aspect of Indian labor market is relative low labor participation, and this low labor participation is because of women. Labor participation indicates the proportion of population that is economically active, employed as well as unemployed, but actively seeking jobs. In fact, a large proportion of the Indian labor force is not even looking for jobs, because we shall see, we have seen in another unit, or there will be a slide in this, how the 2000s onwards there has been a jobless growth in India. The proportion of population that is employed is denoted by workforce. So all the people who are employed and actively seeking employment is the labor. People who are employed is the workforce participation. That employment could be self-employed too. Persons who are not economically active comprise those who are too young or too old, students, rentiers, recipients of pensions, remittances, disabled, attending to specific domestic duties. These are not economically active in the economic sense of the way. Everybody is economic active because at the end of the day, whenever you consume, you are economically active. Despite inauguration of economic reforms, workspace participant rates have hardly improved since the 90s. What we typically talk as the jobless growth. Low rate of workforce participation among females, only 14.7 among urban in India in 2011-12. Now there has always been there has been more than a decade after that. How much that has increased, I was not able to find out. But in case you are Googling, you can see if there is any new data which is there. WPR declined, workforce participation rate declined in case of rural females from 32 to 24.8. In fact, there was some amount of hit when the demonetization happened in 2016. So all these, various factors, political and otherwise, affect, labor participation, workforce participation, and so on and so forth. Most of these figures are 2011-12. Low international ranking in terms of LPR on account of low level of female participation. So, for example, if you look at that, LPR among females was 29% in India against 64% for China for population aged 15 and above. So, why this was like this was based on a lot of social, factors, social cultural factors. It could be the caste system, it could be higher class or higher caste women are discouraged from working. A lot of women are discouraged after marriage from working, based on class or caste and so on and so forth. Employment revived during the first half of 2000. Some commentators argue that economic reforms happened, which were initiated in the 90s, that finally delivered. However, during the period, along with the decline in the quality, revival in employment growth during the period occurred with a decline in the quality, and that is because the way the global systems are moving. Remember, already these global chains and the global production networks that we've been talking upon did happen overnight. It took decades and decades to reach here. So, assuming the fact from 2000, it's been 2 decades. So obviously, it has taken that time for those networks to come in, and with those networks, the production changes have happened, leading to the the labor participation and the workforce participation. Self-employed workers in agriculture, especially females, accounted for a significant part of the increase in employment. Decline in average educational achievement of persons who joined the workforce. 1993-94, growth of wages slowed down, wage inequalities increased. Size of working poor was found to be substantially large. In fact, when the UPA government introduced its flagship thing of Manrega in 2004, 2008, 6 or 8, something like that. I think 2004 they came in. Around that time, there was a substantial increase of employment. There was a increase. There was a substantial movement of people out of poverty, because inevitably, and there was a substantial addition of aggregate demand, because people had a confirmed 100 days job, they had money in their pocket, and the demand increased. Commentators have written about jobless growth in India in the context of exceptional slow rate of employment generation. Employment in agriculture declined with economic development was in absolute, however, accounted for. In spite of the decline in employment in agriculture, it still accounted for a large chunk of the GDP, as well as it was one of the largest employer. And that's where somewhere down the line, as I said, the Indian economists or policymakers or the commentators got it wrong. They thought as things happen in a developed economy, naturally people will move from agriculture into industry into service. Did not happen. So agriculture still is a mainstay in terms of GDP, in terms of employment of people, and that is why, because of a dual economy where the traditional exists with the modern, the and with the size and diversity of the country, it becomes that much more difficult. First half of 2000, massive increase, almost 50 million in number of self-employed. There was a decline in number of self-employed, which was compensated by rise in the size of regular and casual workforce. So there, the global forces or the global engine was working parallelly. Now, when the global engine was working, global engine wanted casuals, contractuals, flexibility, because Indian and we had seen yesterday in MDI 7, there were many laws. There was a strong trade union. Obviously, that was detrimental to the capitalist mode of production. So the contractualization and the casualization was a way out for the capitalists to push down wages and make more profits. Manrega produced a substantial impact on rural employment and rural wages. Manrega also, these were casual workers. These were not, regular employees. So you could get 100 days of employment, but these were not permanent workers. But rose to 6.6 million in 2009-10, which included 2.4 million jobs created through Manrega. Subsequently, however, pace of creation. Or understand the way economic functions, it is quite complex. There are many factors which go on to the economics of a country in terms of GDP, in terms of GNP, in terms of how the labor market functions. Real wage of agriculture workers in India remains stagnant, even declined. Real wages began to rise after 2007-8. Acceleration of growth of consumption, reduction of between 2004 to 2000, and one of the reasons was Manrega. Manrega was a very successful scheme which continues till today. Though the latest news I was hearing was the fact that the money earmarked for the scheme has remained stagnant. Payments have not happened, or whatever is the issue. But the fact is, it is still a very successful scheme. Also, the slow growth, partly on account of structural changes in the country's labor market, fall in the size of agricultural labor force. So, again, time and again, the same thing is being said in different ways. There was a fall in the size of agricultural labor force. Irrespective of that, agriculture still accounted for one of the largest labor forces. Then there was a decline in female agricultural employment. Possibly due to an improvement and not worsening in economic condition. It could also be possible the fact that with men moving, migrating to cities or internationally, the households, the work of the households came on to the women. They moved out of agriculture. The households were, run out of remittances. So that unless you do enough research on this, you possibly will miss the real causes as to why these are happening. So we need more data, and as I keep telling you, the problem with India happens to be the large size, the large population, and the phenomenal diversity. So unless there is enough research which is done, and cross sectional research, cross subjectal research, stream research, you will not be able to find out the exact reasons. So for example, these are the way various people are characterized into self-employed, home workers, and employees. There's a contract, there is a remuneration, who's the contract with, how is the means of production, where is the workplace, what is the supervision. This is an ILO defined difference between self-employed, homeowners, and employees. So in case you get a short note on what, write a short note on self-employed, homeowners, and employees, you can then write a brief note on these. This is as defined by ILO. I always also keep telling you that in scholarly pursuit, always define or figure out who has defined any particular thing. So this is how self-employed, homeowners, and employees are categorized. You can take a screenshot of this. I think it's there in the SLM. You can see it from there also. I think it's there in the SLM. And labor force report 2022, in fact, that's pretty late. This is pretty recent. Own account worker and employee, helper in household employees. enterprises regular wage, and if you see, regular wage has been falling since 2018, 17, 18. Casual employees has almost remained the same. Own account worker and employer is almost the same. Helper in household enterprise seems to have increased. So household enterprises have increased. And household enterprises are typically the system of putting out system. What we used to in the medieval time used to be putting out, or contractual things as we put it out now. So these charts are also there in your SLM, Ministry of Labor, Employment and Government of India. Self-employed increased from 52.2% in 17-18 to 55.6% in 2021. Less likely to benefit from formal employment arrangements, lacking adequate social security representation, a classification known as vulnerable employment. It is obviously vulnerable because, for a simple reason, in the absence of any safety net and in the absence of any safety net from the government side, these people become extremely vulnerable. So I don't think so. You need to remember the figures. All you can say it has increased. Slightly less than half of all employed individuals fall within the vulnerable employment category. Is significantly higher in many low-income nations. Economic challenges and labor market structures prevalent in this country. Importance of promoting decent work opportunity, enhancing labor protections for vulnerable. So as I keep telling you, there are multiple engines working in terms of labor protection, which means government intervening in the labor market, and the capitalists, feeling do not want the government to intervene. I hope I'm not going too fast, guys.
No, sir.
Okay. In India, more than half the workers are self-employed. We have seen that. True in rural areas among women. One might think farming is main reason for high self-employment in rural, but about half of non-agriculture workers there are also self-employed. Even in cities, around 40% of working men and over a third of working women are self-employed. It's a 2023 study by Ghosh Chandrasekhar. So when policy gets formed, one has to look at where all employments can be generated. That is the reason why the country need not follow all policy prescriptions which are prescribed typically by multilateral agencies or think tanks or based out of West, because any policy prescription which is from the global north may or may not be valid for the global south. In fact, a lot of nations make this mistake of trying to you know uh, copy policy prescriptions which do not, in fact, then do not function and lead to other consequences. Most people in India don't choose to be self-employed because they can't find good regular jobs or sometimes any jobs at all. And we come across this news item that a vacancy for a clerk in a government office got lakhs of applications, including those with post graduation and PhD. So these news items are regular, of course, which clearly show that there are not enough jobs, or it's also possible that the skill and the job matching is not happening. because skills are changing in terms of what the jobs are coming, the kind of jobs that are coming. A lot of people are looking at government jobs. The government is not able to provide enough jobs. The private sector is not able to do enough investment for them to get a job. There are all kinds of bureaucratic hassles, red tape, corruption, and so on and so forth. This is different from farmer, small farmer, family business, or skilled professional who may prefer working for themselves. Self-employment is also challenging, and of course, with no safety nets, they are vulnerable. Risk of running a business, changes in price, market conditions, own safety at work, strict government rules, may extra to local officials to operate, hard to get loans. You have to buy supplies higher prices than larger businesses. And Amazon at any moment of time will obviously be in a position to negotiate a better price because of the bulk that they are able to sell in comparison to a local kirana shop or a pop and mom store. ILO data cited by Divan, 55.7% of males and 77.9% of females are self-employed, higher than world averages and South Asian averages. Set against the backdrop of India having one of the lowest labor force participation rates globally, particularly for women. Accompanied by a steady fall in casual employment and fluctuations in regular employment. It's quite possible because for the sense, because there are fluctuations in regular employment, people are low to casual because there is no guarantee. People would prefer to do self-employed rather than casual. Then let's look at the next category, home-based work, where a person referred to as home worker performs work for remuneration in their own home or in another location of the choice, which is not the employer's workplace. Specific products provided by the employer. So ILO has defined what is a home-based work. It may not be used as a definition everywhere. So the Indian conceptualization extends beyond the ILO convention, encompassing genuinely self-employed individuals and contributing family workers. Initial recognition in Indian labor legislation through the Beedi and Cigar Conditions of Employment Act 1996. Home worker is an individual provided with raw material by an employer or contractor to produce beedi or cigars at a producer at home. And naturally, this a home-based worker could also be getting their own raw material to produce something, but in this particular act, it is provided by a contractor, and possibly the payment or the wages would be in terms of the number of units made. The same, I think, today is applicable to zari manufacture in Lucknow, or sari manufacturers, or textile manufacturers, which are home based. Contract Labor Act introduces the concept of an out worker who receives articles or materials from a principal employer to process, modify, finish for commercial. Remember, this is very similar to the putting out system. So we have almost gone around in a cyclic fashion to where we started from before the Industrial Revolution. Processing may either occur either in the out worker's residence or alternate premises. Home workers, especially when the work site is the home itself. So it could be and the wages could be per piece or the total quantity produced. Independent Group on Home-Based Workers in India report 2008 can be involved in a range of economic activities from labor-intensive manual tasks to capital or information-focused professional and clerical service. What we have seen today also, for example, in MDI 9, where we were talking about trafficking and their modus operandi, today these criminals are giving hackers, home-based hackers, the job of scamming people or luring people into trafficking. It's a home-based work. So these particular activities have also diversified economic activity. So home-based activities either piece rate or own account worker. So what is this piece rate and own account worker? Piece rate receive tasks from subcontractors, intermediate employees, traders or firms and are compensated based on the quantity of items they produce per piece. Typically lack direct access to the markets for their goods. So they do not engage with the market, they deal through contractors. Piece rate workers involved in international production chains or cater to national or local markets, including garments, bidis, agarbattis, and textiles. In fact, a large amount of home-based work are basically piece rate workers. Uh, so what typically happens in terms of structural change in employment? Evolving relative significance of the primary economic sectors such as agriculture, industry, and services throughout the process of economics and development. So there was initially, when typically the India took a loan from IMF. IMF gave a policy prescription that you need to do the structural changes, you need to cut down on subsidies, you need to cut down on welfare measures, and you need to move people from agriculture into industry. And then subsequently, because of the movement of these workers, the role of these industries or these sectors onto the GDP supposedly is supposed to change, because again, as per the larger economic formulation, things are supposed to move from agriculture to industry to service. But India, like a lot of global South, are dualistic economies. Dualistic economies are economies where traditional and modern sectors coexist. Now, it is impossible to suddenly change an economy from a traditional to a modern, considering the size of the nation, the number of people, and the diversity. Structural changes can illuminate the complex process of economic modernization and challenges associated with balancing growth. Now, you do a lot of focus on industry and neglect agriculture, it will be detrimental to the larger economy of the nation. In fact, one of the reasons why Indian economy or Indian policy floundered or is still floundering is that somewhere in the start, a lot of focus happened on the industry. Agriculture did not get the kind of focus which the industry was getting, and simultaneously the whole world economy was changing, and things structurally changed in the sense industry could not take off and people moved from agriculture into services. So, and also understand each country has a limitation in terms of resources. So when you are focusing, you are allocating resources. So today, when India came up with this, tagline of manufacturing in India, uh, there were a lot of challenges to the tagline. The tagline was a political rhetoric, but to get manufacturing, like what typically is happening in America. Now, politically, manufacturing in America sounds good. Uh, uh, rhetorically, high tariffs may, and typically India has also gone through this thing about high tariffs, trying to protect the domestic industry. But unfortunately, it does not work because, if a person will have to spend 100 rupees to manufacture a product, and that product is available for 1 rupee outside, more often than not somebody will import that 1 rupee product, mark it up to 50 rupees, and it will be still cheaper for producing it at 100 rupees. And that is how the Indian industry collapsed, with low cost Chinese goods being pumped into India. So, parallelly, there are multiple engines, and a nation and its policymakers and economists needs to understand, or, allocate resources, labor, figure out what skills are required, where to skill labor, which sector to push in. And you cannot ignore any sector because, to your detriment, because then something else will happen. Because at the end of the day, when you're looking at overall economic growth, so let me give you an example. Today, when you look at the fact that education is important for manufacturing, think about the fact that education starts with primary education, secondary education, then there is tertiary education, there is higher education, there is vocational education. Now, and then there is change of skill sets which are there, which is happening in terms of technology movements, in terms of technology, how things are happening out there. Now, if you focus too much on school education and forget the university education, remember, with the absence of higher education, then besides the higher education, there is research and development. So there is, if not enough resources are given to research and development, your primary education or your school education comes to naught, because inevitably the children will come out of school, find out the higher education is not strong, or will come out of higher education and find there is not enough research and development or stuff in which they can go, and there will be a brain drain, because students or people will go wherever there are opportunities. In fact, that's what happened with IITs and engineers in the 60s to 90s. There were these high quality engineers which came out of IITs, but the industry was not ready to absorb them, and all of them went to the US and Europe, settled out there, and it was brain drain. So, to figure out how to, structurally change or allocate resources is a complex task. And how to create to create an employment structure. How much of labor markets to intervene, how much to not intervene, what kind of protection to be offered, where to let it go. The share of regular employment increased slightly, non-regular employment decreased. Most of the productive growth and labor happened within the unorganized sector rather than workers moving from the unorganized to the organized sector. So a lot of productive growth and labor reallocation happened in the unorganized sector. And in fact, when the 2016 demonetization happened, it largely affected the unorganized sector. So there was already movement and changes in the unorganized sector, which got hit because of demonetization. This is an ILO working paper 2019 about structural changes in employment. So think about the fact how complex it is to plan economically in terms of sectors, in terms of labor, in terms of the way resources have to be allocated in various industries. A 2019 ILO working paper on structural changes. In unorganized sector, some positive changes. The share of casual workers decreased while regular employment increased slightly. However, in organized sector, increase in casual work and unprotected regular jobs. So irrespective of the fact that there was a movement of work in the organized sector, that work was more in terms of casual rather than regular jobs. And even regular jobs were unprotected. The best form of employment, regular protected jobs, remain almost constant. So there was this news item coming in about TCS not giving a hike in salary. Now, if a company is not giving a hike in salary, that gives a certain amount of uncertainty in employees' minds. However, the quality of these jobs deteriorated with fewer workers having long-term contracts or full social security benefits. So also understand, because the labor is an embodiment of a human being, and if a human being does not get some security in terms of job, the productivity will suffer. So you see, there are so many engines to look at when you are doing a policy prescription, or you are, trying to, plan your economy. Quality of the jobs deteriorated, fewer workers having long-term contracts, which we saw in the earlier slide. Real incomes and consumption increased for all categories of workers during this high growth period. So there was a high growth period, where the real incomes and consumption. What Sanjeev said yesterday, that everywhere you see people have two-wheelers or four-wheelers there. And also we need to understand, Indians have also got into now a pattern which was there in the global north about consumption. So a lot of people, in spite of the means for consumption, are doing ostensible consumption, which leads to indebtedness. So unless we are actually looking at a latest research on how movements are happening in terms of income, in terms of savings, in terms of consumption, we are not able to answer questions. And apparently, what we see may or may not be true, or it would be a part of the larger picture. And remember, things change very fast. Say, for example, between January and April, the world economy is in a tizzy within 4 months. Between March and April, the US economy has been hit a lot. The share markets have been hit a lot. So there is an employment classification in the unorganized or the informal sector, includes proprietary business, partnership within households, between different households, enterprises where number of workers is unknown or which not provide. So when the labor laws and a complexity of labor laws was there in terms of institution, the labor law institution in India was very rigid. The capitalist model found way about in contracting. For example, there was a labor law which says that whenever a unit had over 10 people, there was a notion of provident fund, social security benefit. So what people did was they kept the figure below 10 or below 20. So and always remember, worldwide, people, businesses, capitalism always negotiates to find the, wherever they are able to, do better. In fact, in diaspora studies, we've always seen that the migration happens and the diaspora formation happens wherever there's a better. So if a nation gives a dual citizenship, people will go ahead and take it because that gives them a fallback option. Why is a lot of Indians buying property in India? Because it's a fallback option. in spite of the fact that they might be US citizens, they might be European citizens, they still own a property in India as a fallback option.
What is fallback option, sir?
Fallback option is, Sanjeev, it's something like this. If you today buy shares and the share market is extremely volatile, you, as a fallback option, keep certain money in your FD, which gives you an assured return.
Okay. That
So
means in other words, not putting all eggs in one basket.
Correct.
Okay, sir.
The technical word is hedging.
Pardon?
The technical hedging. So hedging.
Can you spell it, sir? I mean, Hedging.
Hedging.
Okay. Hedging. Okay. D is silent.
Yes. So we always, let the child do physics, chemistry, bio, maths, because he can become an engineer. Suppose he does not clear the engineering examination, he can appear for medicine. It's a hedging.
Okay.
This is what is called a fallback option, because there is a unpredictability in the world. It has always been there. And people always try and protect themselves and their investments by hedging, by a fallback option. What happens if this happens? Then this.
Sir.
Similarly, employment classification in the organized sector, proprietary business, partnership that employ more than 10 workers, enterprises that provide social security benefits to their workers, even their numbers of workers are unknown, are classified within the organized sector. Wherever there is a certain amount of benefit, social security benefit, provident fund, gratuity, is an organized sector. Classified in the unorganized sector, range of employment. Oh, we have already done this. Proprietary business. The concept of informal worker or informal employment extends beyond sector boundaries. All self-employed, own account workers, unpaid family workers, those employed in additionally regular salaried and casual workers who lack social security benefit also come under the informal category. Today, governments, various state governments as well as the central government does a lot of work through contractualization. Now, all these contractor does not have social security. For example, Agniveer scheme in the army, it's more like a contract. So a lot of those, they don't have a pension. And that is how the global, workforce, or the way productions are changing, leading to changing in the workforces, as well as the labor engagement into workforce. Formal workers, formal employment encompasses self-employed employees in the formal sector, regular salaried casual worker who receive social security. So even if you are working in a shop which gives you certain social benefits, like possibly having an insurance, having a health cover, is categorized as a formal employment. There's a contract. More often than not, contract workers do not have even though it is called a contract, but there is no contract. And large part of the global economy or the global workforce is going through a process known as informalization. Unorganized sector consists of all unincorporated private entity. What informalization has done is then, you are able to circumvent labor laws. Households engage in sale and production of goods and services operated on proprietary or partnership basis with less than 10 total workers. Informal worker employment is unorganized workers, consists of those working in unorganized sectors, household employers, workers informal. So informal, what we are seeing today in terms of Uber, Swiggy, Zomato, Blinkit, these are all informal workers, informalization. Now, in informalization, because these are not formalized setups, you can't unionize, and then it's a hire and fire policy. There are no social security benefits. So the term is informalization. Informal sector, informal worker employment, and informal economy. The informal sector and its worker plus the informal workers in the formal sector constitute the informal economy. Proportion of workers in the informal sector grows relative to the total workforce of the country is called informalization of workforce. In fact, you'll see world over there's a large proportion of informalization of workforce, especially in the global south. So there's an ILO employment working paper 254. India's informalization was driven by both demand and supply side factors in the labor market. Growth strategy impact. India's focus on heavy industries led import substitution industries in 50s, limited job creation in the formal sector. And as I keep telling you, nothing happens overnight, and everything that one does has a intended consequence, and there are some unintended consequences. The reservation of certain products for small scale industries created perverse incentives for the firm to remain small. So for example, when you try and raise tariffs to protect local employment, also local industries also understand, then the local industries have no incentives to innovate because they are protected. One of the factors of a market driven economy or a market driven industry, and that is the reason why they talk about competition, is because then the companies have an incentive to innovate. In fact, when there was a high tariffs in the 80s before liberalization happened in the 90s, the Indian industry, typical example being Ambassador, was the mainstay car. There was no innovation. It was when Maruti came in, suddenly people realized that there was a choice. And when 90s the liberalization happened, there was more choices. And today, with a globalized economy, more often than not, every economist will say tariffs is a bad idea to get your economy to, to get jobs into your country. Tariffs is the worst idea, in fact, they say. I've been watching various videos by various commentators about how tariffs is a bad idea, because another engine that you need to understand is the global commodity chains and the production networks. Labor law complexities, multitude of labor laws, 45 central, numerous state laws as of 2014, education and skill gap. And remember, all these things do not happen overnight. So if you have to get skills, remember, one of the biggest reason for India known as an IT powerhouse was, the focus on IT and engineering, which led to, by the 2000s India was a worldwide IT powerhouse. But then subsequently other countries caught up. We had a great demographic dividend in terms of English speaking. Then the politics came in and said English is not our mother tongue. But the world over, the engine to drive the world is English. And then the other countries caught up. English speaking. Gender disparities. Women face greater challenges in labor market, lower participation rates, and higher likelihood of informal employment. And every economic person who is in the in the age between 15 to 45 is an economic engine, and if that person is not you, it's like an airplane having seats going empty.
Didn't get your point, sir. Age.
Sanjeev, the point is that if you are between 15 and 45, you are you are a labor.
Sir.
And if your labor is not utilized in some way or the other, it the nation loses out on the economics.
Okay.
It's like a plane flying off with empty seats. Once the plane flies off, the seat is empty, the airline loses.
Yes.
So it needs to fill up its seats.
Okay.
Similarly, the nation needs to use its labor, because if it does not, the labor gets old, then it becomes useless.
Yes.
Right?
Sir.
Okay. Besides informalization, the second term is casualization. Casualization is daily wagers who are not usually hired by employers on a regular basis. Casual workers do not get a place on permanent roles. Casual workers are often not given social security benefits. So most of what they say, theka dena, or giving work on contract, is casualization. So you pick up work on a specific job and then leave them and take some other workers. So there is a 2023 research paper authored by Suresh Chandra Agarwal. 23% of workers in India were casual laborers, declined from 25% in 2017-18. More common in rural areas compared to urban areas. Again, that's what's possible because Manrega employs casual workers. So you're supposed to enroll, get 100 days, and then you're off. No significant difference between total males and total females in terms of casual work. First wave employment fell by about 20%, which was there a worldwide figure. During COVID, casual work fell down as casual works in public works. And actually, Manrega was a great opportunity during COVID because it allowed employment. And employment, remember, gets wages, wages gets demand, and gets your GDP moving. So this is the 2023 paper. This is there in your SLM. You can read more about it. Casual workers earned an average about 58% of what regular employees earn. So obviously the salaries are less. Obviously there are no social benefits. Work fewer days per week, fewer hours per day compared to regular. Found in sectors like construction, agriculture, manufacturing. But today, casual workers are there in teaching. Casual workers are there in all kinds of work. Lack access to social security benefit, written job contract, making their employment precarious. Contractualization, a study, 2024. In fact, this is a very recent study by Kulvinder Singh. Contract workers in India's formal manufacturers and increased significantly. Obviously, this is all done to bypass the labor laws. Obviously, it is done to increase profits, or obviously, it is done to reduce costs in terms of social security, pensions, and so on and so forth. Factories in rural areas have high proportion of contract workers compared to urban areas. Some industries have much higher share of contract workers. Coke, refined petroleum, nuclear fuel, 74.6%, while textile products and leather have 16.8%. Again, you don't need to remember, percentages. There are certain industries, especially in rural areas, which have a higher, casual workers. Significant varies across state, could be due to factors like need for workflows flexibility and cost considerations. Consistent increase in proportion of contract workers over the past 2 years. And the way things are going across the world, informalization and casualization is the way things are going. In fact, even if you are a worker where there is a hire and fire policy, it's more like a casual workers because there's no job security. Increased contractualization of workforce is largely attributed to rigidities in India's employment protection legislation. This particular contract 5B of Industrial Dispute Act talks about the fact that if there is a permanent worker, the industry needs to take the permission of the government before firing that worker. So they have gone through small scale, they have gone through informalization, contractualization. So that is one of the reasons given. Labor regulations must be strict, cover less than 10% of the total workforce. Laws are poorly enforced, leading to significant gap. Contract labor regulation. Even the Contract Labor Regulation Act, which applies to establishing employing 20 or more contract workers, the judicial interpretation has been pro-employer. So the market is almost kind of, there is a government intervention and yet there is a flouting of the laws. And this has led to more informalization and casualization of the workforce. So, prevalent issues and challenges, employment report 2024, a very latest report, slow employment generation, lack of structural transformation, as we have seen, labor market inequalities, challenges of technology, regional disparities, education and skill mismatch, challenges of employability, fast changing tech. See, the environment is changing extremely fast. Global environment is changing very fast. So how is the nation economy geared up for the changes? So for example, now tariffs have been imposed on Indian products. How much is being discussed in the Indian media? How much is being discussed in the think tanks? What is happening? And things are moving very fast on the global scene. And unless there is research being done, unless there is data being brought out, unless it is discussed in the mainstream media. So if I see a lot of media from France, Germany, China, Japan, US discussing all these moves, the Indian media, I still do not come across enough movement in terms of this discussion, pros and cons. And unless this discussion happens, at the end of the day, as I keep saying, economy is not a science. You cannot test it out in a laboratory. There are perspectives, there are ways how the nation takes care of these challenges, how to surmount these challenges. Challenges are there. How people, Domingos is asking how people of self-employment manage their social security for retirement issues in India. So Domingos, here the social networks come into the picture. As I was talking yesterday in MDI 7, typically social networks. So inevitably, you are self-employed, you fall ill or you have an accident, you borrow money out of your social networks. For example, I'll give you an example of my for my domestic help. The lady who comes to my house for domestic work, her husband is a worker who was picked up by a contractor for some work, and he was working on the third floor and he fell down and broke his femur bone, the leg bone. Now, after the bone was broken, they needed money. There was no money. So I pitched in, got him admitted in a hospital, got his operation, and then I did some crowdfunding. Uh, and inevitably, these people then go into either take money from money lenders and then get into indebtedness or use their social network. And if you see, most of these informal workers and casual workers are always in debt. Domingos?
Yes, sir.
Got it. Thank you.
And that would also be the case possibly in Africa. In all, developing societies, and more of this informalization and casualization with no social security net, either by an employer or by the government, then you have to dwell on your own networks, your own social networks, or then you get entrapped into money lending And then there is indebtedness. Indebtedness can lead to trafficking. All kinds of things happen. Okay.
Yes, sir.
And then there are disparities. So let's sum up. Diversification has been particularly slow, yet the labor force is moving away from agriculture, but it's not moving into industry, it's moved into services. India's labor market is relatively low labor participation rate. Inaugural of economic reforms, workforce participation rates have hardly improved since 90, except in the case of urban males. Self-employed workers, a significant part of increase in employment. More than half of all workers are self-employed, true in rural areas among women. Don't choose to be self-employed because they can't find good regular jobs and sometimes any jobs at all. Unorganized or informal sector encompasses range of employment arrangements. Informal economy, informal workers, informal sector constitute. Informal workers do not have a contract, job contract, do not have social security. Informalization of workforce decides the situation. Proportion of workers in the informal sector grows related to total workforce. So we are going through a process of informal economy and informalization of the workforce. There are some references. You can read. There are more references in your SLM. Let me stop here. Any questions?
Sir,
Yes, Sanjeev.
this structural change is a rotational basis, no, sir? It's always happened.
So you know what? Again, the fact is, the way. Economists defined the fact that, and when they were talking about development, they looked at the fact that the country and understand the fact that most economists who defined policy prescription were Western based. So inevitably, if I was a person who was defining a policy prescription, I would look around into my own experience and everything which is around, and I would feel that that's the correct way. So and then of course there are ideological considerations. So these Western economists then looked at the Western economy, starting from the industrialization, and said that the way countries became developed was when they followed the economic model of primary, which is agriculture, secondary, which is industry, and tertiary, which is services, because that's how those countries moved from primary to secondary to tertiary. And that is how they had a policy prescription for all countries and said that all countries must follow these to become developed. So when India took loan from IMF or World Bank, IMF and World Bank put this policy prescription that, hey, you are giving too many subsidies to farmers, you are giving too many welfare measures, that's wrong, freebies.
Yes.
Forgetting the fact that their own countries and their own economies give a social security net. But because they had to give a policy formula, they had to give that gyan, they had to give that information because they were talking from a position of strength. India, when it was going through its own process of modernizing and developing, sometimes took those policy prescription. In fact, today also a lot of times you tend to see that some sort of what is happening in the West, we tend to pick it up and try and paste it, copy paste on our systems. Does not work. Because the way our social society, our social structuring, our hierarchies, our way of understanding does not work that way.
Sir.
So unless you modify, similarly with technology, you cannot take a technology and copy paste and put it in a new social, cultural, economic setup because it does not work. People work in their own particular way. So you need to what is called customize technology into local conditions. And inevitably, when you copy paste, more often than not, it does not work as it is supposed to work or as it is working there.
Sir.
And that is where the structural adjustment part came in, because economists in India also understood the fact that, for India to grow, agriculture cannot grow unless it is modernized. It cannot be modernized because there are, land holdings are smaller. A lot of subsistence agriculture is happening. At the end of the day, they are looking at how to get the country to grow faster, because one of the earliest economic models was a trickle down effect. The trickle down effect said that if the GDP grows, inevitably everything will trickle down and everybody would come out of poverty.
Sir.
We have noticed the fact it does not work.
Yes, it does not. Sir, when structural changes happen, that will also be similar in occupational structure also.
So inevitably, the structural changes are production changes and obviously the labor changes.
Both are interconnected.
Obviously, because see, you cannot have an industry unless you have a labor force to cater to that industry.
Sir.
So that is why I keep telling you, read MDI 8
Yes,
first,
sir.
then read MDI 7.
Sir.
Because unless you know how the production is changing, how will you know how the labor force is changing?
Yes, sir.
Because once the production is changing, the labor force is changing, and accordingly the migration patterns will change.
Sir. And in fact, sir, this subject is also having some connection with the sociology subject. Today morning in the first class, Dr. Rex has showed one news article relating to informal labor sector, especially on women, sir. That came in the Hindu newspaper on March 31st after our MDI 7 or MDI 8 class, sir. Actually, I was referring that news article with MDI, class actually. But that article has been shown as an example in sociology class today.
So, Sanjeev, you need to understand, sociology, economics, political science in classrooms are separate subjects. In the real world, all of them, they are not working as silos. They interface with each other.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, economic labor market also is determined on caste considerations,
Sir.
on gender considerations. So that's sociology.
Sir.
So in the real world, all these subjects interface. And in fact, the whole subject of migration and diaspora is a very interdisciplinary subject.
Yes, yes, sir. Sir, so, one last small question, sir.
Please.
Clarification. I've gone through this MDI 8 assignment paper. The first two questions related to, first question asked about impacts of industrial revolution.
Okay.
Second question asked about to describe the concept of first industrial divide. Sir, in my understanding, that industrial revolution and first industrial divide both are same, I think so, sir.
Google and say what is the first industrial divide. See what comes out.
Sir.
Google it right now and see.
Just one. Meanwhile, anybody can ask the question.
We are waiting.
First industrial. Sir, it is telling about first industrial revolution only, sir.
Exactly.
Sir.
Because, inevitably, hang on, let me also see what comes out. Refers to the period during the Industrial Revolution when mass production became dominant, characterized by rigidity, defined division of labor, standardized products, and large-scale cooperation.
Sir.
So your first question was, what were the consequences of the Industrial Revolution? Wasn't that the question, Sanjeev?
Yeah, impacts of Industrial Revolution on manufacturing industries.
So you can talk about how it spawned out mass production and it spawned out mass media to cater to mass consumption.
Sir.
And it led to what was Taylorism and Fordism.
Okay.
And the consequences was in terms of if you want to then dwell on the fact that because the whole process was explained using the classical economic theory. It was all about creating surplus, irrespective of how that was created. So inevitably, the workers' working condition, children were employed, women were employed, and so on and so forth.
Sir.
So that way you craft an answer.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, it appears that all assignments, especially these MDI 7 and 8, are interlinked, sir.
That is why I said when you read 8 and 7, you will be able to craft. And mind you, I'm using the word craft an answer.
Yes, sir.
So you would need to craft an answer.
Sir.
And it will see, once you are able to relate to what's happening, and that's why I've made it very simple. Do not get stuck into the economic part of it. Understand the larger concept. Once you are understanding the larger concept, you will be able to craft an answer and clear your examination.
Sir.
Clearing an examination is an important thing, so let's not devalue it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any other question? Shabir, any question? Gurpreet, Domingos, Sophia?
No, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Shabir?
Question, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So in that case, if there are no questions, then we meet each other at 5:30 with MDI 9. I'll be talking about how to identify victims in trafficking situations. Have a nice lunch and your next class, and see you at 5:30 then. Bye, guys.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.